second edition of the new podcast that we're starting called Reclaiming My Mind. Some of the feedback that I had regarding the podcast where people were curious as to why we chose that name. So for people who aren't familiar, Maxine Waters had a kind of famous scene where there was a discussion she was having with someone she was interviewing, and he kept trying to defer and waste her time. And she was very clear that she was reclaiming her time in the hearing that she was in. So we were inspired by that, and we want to reclaim our time and reclaim our minds. So that's the reason for our podcast name. Also, my name is Jessica Vaughn. I am the host of this show. I am the president of the Progressive Caucus of Tampa Bay, and kind of a local activist. And luckily, I've established some relationships locally with a lot of key players. And I think it's a luxury to be able to have them on our show and talk about some issues that are affecting us not only locally, but statewide, and educate our voters on their rights and things that are happening locally. So that's a little introduction of the actual podcast that we had to skip last time. Our guest today is Rosalind Moffett. Do you want me to call you Roz or Rosalind?
You can call me whatever you want. You can call me Roz. That's good.
Okay. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're currently doing so people get familiar with you, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So born and raised in California. I now live out in eastern Hillsborough County, because there is this whole part of Hillsborough County between Tampa and Plant City that gets forgotten until we get countywide elections. But I live out there now. We've lived here about a dozen years. We got involved with the East Hillsborough County Democratic Club when it was just getting started. And so we did a lot with that. I did a lot with party organizing in terms of the Hillsborough County Democratic Party here, and organizing precincts and getting out the vote and all of that good stuff, and helping candidates along the way. In 2008 and 2010, I worked specifically with a progressive candidate who tried to get Adam Putnam fired from his job. And so I worked with Doug Tudor in his race, and he ran twice. And then I went back to party organizing, and I had done some single issue work here and there. And then my kids got a little bit older, and I stepped away for a little bit. And like a lot of people, I think we felt like we'd made great strides locally. Right. We had turned Hillsborough County blue. We had put in place mechanisms, and clubs were growing all over the place. And we felt as though, okay, time to maybe let some people step up. Right. And I'll step back for just a little bit. And then we got Trump. And so right after that, my husband and I kind of looked at each other and said, okay, what are we going to do? And I've said this to so many people, but my older daughter woke up the next morning, and her one question to us is, what are we going to do? And I told my husband, she didn't ask us if there was anything we could do. Right. She didn't ask us if we thought we might do something.
Right. It wasn't a question of if.
Exactly.
It was what.
Exactly. So that's November. The beginning of December, we reached out to people and said, hey, if you're interested in doing something about what just happened, if you're interested in coming back out and doing the hard work, and I can't stress that enough, because we didn't ask people if they wanted to march and have fun and wear cool hats, and there's power in that. But what we were specifically looking for was the people that knew what it meant to walk door to door, what it meant to call somebody and get them out to vote.
The less sexy work.
The less sexy stuff that is so important to do. And our call out got about 60 people over to our house, and we just went around the circle. It was a little bit of a therapy session, but it also started us saying, because of who we are, because of how we identify in this room, because of what we want to do, our revolution is our home. That's where we're going to do the most good, because we personally don't care if you identify as a socialist, if you identify as, I don't want to be registered with a party. Right. If you're willing to put in the work to move us in a progressively democratic way, then come on board. And that was when we started organizing through Our Revolution.
So to clarify, because a lot of people who are listening to this hear the term Our Revolution and they think they mean personally Our Revolution, which it is. But what we're really talking about in that regard is the organization that Bernie Sanders, after he lost the nomination, he started two separate organizations, Brand New Congress and Our Revolution, to help promote progressive candidates who are nonpartisan. So you're saying that you started a local chapter of the national organization of that group that Bernie Sanders started, Our Revolution. Is that correct?
Right, exactly. So they have local groups, and then they have, like you mentioned, the national, over. It's very much bottom up and not top down. And it happens a lot. We went from Obama for America to Organizing for America. So these transitions happen a lot. So yeah, it would have sounded kind of nice to say we were starting a revolution out in Eastern Hillsborough County.
It is a revolution.
But no, it was part of Bernie's group. And that was how we decided that we would use their tools to help us better organize. They allow us to, announce our events so that people can find us on the web, and they allow us to use a lot of their messaging service. They allow us to use the ability to email people. They're coming out with a thing called the Hub, and that'll be a cool way that we can interact with people. And then they were keeping us up to date, because I'm sure anybody, no matter what time you got involved politically, you're getting your information out of a fire hose sometimes. It is just coming at you so much every day. Yes. So it's nice to have a dedicated place where you can go and say, these are pertinent issues. Don't lose sight. Don't get caught up in the daily tweet or the daily whatever is going on. This is what we got to stay focused on. This is what's going through the legislature.
Plus, you can also help endorse candidates and keep people nationally up to date on the candidates local that you want to support. And from what I heard in a lot of the elections that have happened since then, special elections, a lot of our revolution candidates ended up being successful and winning due to that support. So it helps you organize behind candidates, who you might not learn about if you want to support candidates that aren't local.
Absolutely.
What I understand. So.
Absolutely. 27.
27. That's how many candidates that our revolution had endorsed. That's awesome.
Yep.
I'm so glad somebody opened a local chapter of that. If I wasn't busy doing other things, that would have been something I would have focused on. So thank you for helping with that here.
You are most welcome.
All right. So that gives us a little bit of background about, where you've come from and what you guys are focusing on. And what we kind of wanted to talk about today, as I did some polling on what people wanted to learn about and talk about and get educated about. And what seemed to pop up in a majority of groups were kind of focusing on 2018, what that's going to look like, midterm elections, understanding the difference between what a primary means and what a runoff means, and talking about election dates. And a lot of people did want to talk about primaries and open and close. So we have a big subject to talk about here. First, I wanted to kind of get your feedback on the midterm election that's coming up. So in 2018, we're going to have, it looks like from what I pulled here, all of the House of Representatives are going to be up for re-election, because that's a 2-year term. So every 2 years, once in the midterms and once in the presidential election, those seats are up.
Right.
And from what I read here, 33 of the 100 seats of the U.S. Senate will be up for vote. So, or up for election. So if we're going to have any time where we shift the power, because right now, as we know, the Republicans control the presidency, the House of Representatives, Congress, or they're leaning towards having a stronghold on the judiciary system.
And I will say that part of trickle down is absolutely true in Florida, because it trickles down to the governor and to our state legislature and right on down. So that part of the Republican, plan absolutely does trickle down.
So we're talking about the midterms. We're talking about how that gives us an opportunity, because the whole concept of democracy is we have a checks and balances. So if we have a Republican president, we might have, some sort of bipartisanship in one of the houses that can balance, the different agendas of each party. And right now that's been thrown out of balance. So the true understanding of our democracy really is in threat if we don't have a majority in one of the branches of government. So I think that's why everyone's really passionate and excited about this midterm election coming up. But for people who don't know about midterms, can you give us any insight as working for candidates, a little more information about midterms or anything that you might want to share about that?
Yeah, the excitement begins 204 days from now is primary day. So in 204 days, people actually start to cast their vote. And it is, aside from that mystical, romantic aspect of everybody is equal. When you walk in and cast your vote, mine matters just as much as yours, just as much as your neighbor's, just as much as the guy on the other side of the street. That part is the cool part. And that's the part that people that are working in politics get really jazzed about, because this is when the playing field truly is level.
Oh, I love that way of looking at it.
In a midterm, And especially in a situation, so not to try to, I don't think my position here by any means is to, fairness to both sides.
Sure.
So I'll say, just for the people that had that same reaction to the election in November 2016, this is our only shot to put a check on the president until he gets out of office. This is it. And whether we impeach and, beautiful things happen and we see him leave that house, then we have President Pence.
Right.
So unless we want to stop the agenda and make sure we're protecting our air, our water, our Constitution,
right,
this is our shot to do it.
So
and
no
I
pressure.
think that, right. So no pressure. Just make sure you get out to vote. But I think it's important. Democrats continue to say all the time, have you had enough of what is happening? Because this is going to be your one chance to make that difference, to make the change.
So that's a good point, because I feel my personal opinion, which will be infused in this podcast a lot, is that, this, poor NPAs who don't feel like they have to force themselves in one box or another to participate in our democracy are often left out, right? That comment comes down to if you're, what Democrats, the messaging that they have to get out, how important these elections are.
Right.
And that's what we're going to also talking about primaries and that magic day is where, people who aren't registered as one party or the other, if they're included in our democracy, if they really have a choice in picking our nominees, what are the benefits of unfortunately being, registered one or the other, and how we are trying to change that, right? I mean, I feel like collectively progressives have identified that that's not a winning strategy and that's not a way to include people into democracy. So those of us who are working in the party or outside of the party, really hopefully are pushing so that everybody is included regardless of whether they're registered or not.
Right.
But so when you said in 209 days, is that what you said?
204.
200. So what date is that exactly? Where does that bring us?
August 28th.
August 28th. So on August 28th, what happens?
That is primary day. So that's the day. So we have closed primaries.
In Florida. When we say we mean in the entire state of Florida.
Correct.
Okay.
So in Florida with a closed primary, that means that however you are registered, so I'm registered as a Democrat, when I get my ballot, I will have only Democrats to be able to vote for.
Okay.
Right? And if you're a Republican and you're registered as a Republican, you will have a ballot that has only Republicans that you can vote for. If there is more than one party running in that election, in that race, right? So that's what the closed primary means for us. So as a Democrat, I can't vote to say who the Republican nominee for any one position should be. Or can be.
Okay.
There are states that have open primaries and they can do that. Their ballot has the name of everyone running in that race and they have a chance to vote for whoever. And so a lot of times people will say one of the downsides of that is people might want to try to pick the weakest person on the other side, right?
But they can do that anyway now.
They can do
just
that
by
anyway.
Registering as the party that they don't represent.
Absolutely. So basically what we're doing by just having the closed primary system is making sure that some people are not voting.
Right.
Right? That's the only thing we're guaranteeing. You can't guarantee that anything is going to be an absolutely perfect system. And honestly, where we are, whether you're talking superdelegates or closed or open primaries, and I know we'll get into the superdelegates and all that good stuff too, but whether you're talking any of that, it is still better than a few guys sitting in a room and lighting up a cigar and deciding who's going to run for what, right?
Which is how the backroom conversations. Absolutely.
Right. So, I mean, the power is moving to the people. It's just moving slowly.
Right. But in order for it to move more quickly, people have to embrace the power and be engaged and be informed and advocate for their rights. So
Absolutely.
It's like a catch-22. It's like you have to be willing to advocate for your rights in order to get them, which is unfair, but unfortunately that's kind of where we're at. So, during the primary, if you're independent, will you get a ballot or will you get to vote at all?
No.
Okay. So you're out of that. So then we have, and give me an example on that date of who will be choosing the nominees for. I know our governor will have, if you're a Democrat, you'll choose the Democratic nominee who will then go on to the general election.
Right.
In November. And those will be our candidates. What are some local races where we'll have primaries and only people in certain parties will be able to choose who are the nominees?
I have to think back to that answer I just gave. I would imagine if you had two independent candidates in a race,
running for governor or whatnot.
You might
because there are
able
some
to
independents.
Right.
That's a good question.
I would go to the Division of Elections because that's where you're going to get the answer. I don't know. Yeah. I correct myself on that. I think you actually might be able to if you have more than one person
running as
to vote
an independent.
in a primary.
We'll come back to that and try to figure out if we can find that answer. So
but locally, so here,
Mm-hmm.
say you're a voter in Hillsborough County, you're going to have on your primary ballot,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have all the way from senator to Congress to governor, and then it goes all the state. So governor, CFO, chief financial officer for the state. We'll have attorney general. We'll have the lieutenant governor. We'll have the
so these are some big positions that we're going to be choosing who's going to be our representative and our nominee.
Yes. So, and it goes from, I want to make sure that people who, 20 years ago had their right to vote taken away because they were convicted of a felony have an opportunity to vote. Big issues like that, all the way down to the road that I drive on every day is god awful, congested, and we need to do something about my commute.
Right.
So from all the different angles of how politics impact our lives, and I have to be able to get in a Paul Wellstone quote. I'm not going to be able to go this whole time, but politics is about improving people's lives. And so when we see elections like this, it is who's in charge of the money that goes to your school, who is looking at your transportation system. We will have the Hillsborough County Board of County Commissions. That's county-wide offices as well as districts within the county. Those will be up and we'll have primaries in those with really good candidates to choose from. We'll be looking at school board, those, like I said, that directly impact your school. We'll look at state senators, state representatives.
So 2 things I want to go back to in what you just said. First of all, a lot of people aren't familiar with Paul Wellstone. So I wouldn't mind taking a few minutes to talk about Paul Wellstone. So he was originally the senator from Minnesota, which Al Franken then replaced because he died in a tragic plane crash shortly before Al Franken was elected, right?
There was a person in between. His name is escaping me right now. Last name started with a C. There was somebody that came between Paul Wellstone and Al Franken, but Al Franken cites Paul Wellstone as his inspiration. And I think he was that way for a lot of people. So they have a really funky system. If anybody really wants to geek out on how nominations happen, look at Minnesota because you have to caucus and it's really interesting. But Paul Wellstone gave an absolutely amazing speech to his supporters that were going to go out and caucus on his behalf. And a lot of what he said was inspirational in terms of, I stand for a woman's right to choose. And if that makes me a liberal, I'm a liberal. And I stand for free, public, equal education. And if that makes me a liberal, I'm a liberal. And it was just that speaking of values and the sincerity and the honesty that, yes, that's what we want to hear. Do not mince your words.
And
Let
then
me know who you are.
Started a think tank, right? There's the Wellstone Institute, which helps train progressive candidates and offers classes, and gets a lot of people ready because he was one of our progressive kind of forefathers, I would say.
Absolutely.
A lot of people attribute that to him, right?
They do. Wellstone does candidate training. His wife Sheila, who also passed away with him in that same plane wreck, which focuses on domestic abuse and prevention and education. So the two of them had equally important endeavors.
Yeah. So I only learned about him a few years ago and I wanted to share that information because, he was such an inspiration to so many people. So thank you for bringing him up. Yeah. So when we were talking about, the primary happening for nonpartisan races, which means races where it doesn't matter what party affiliation you are, which are generally more local races, such as school board. I think city council is nonpartisan and our mayor is nonpartisan, I believe. So they're not going to have a little letter next to their name when you go to vote for them telling you easily who's the Democrat and who's the Republican. You actually have to kind of look at each candidate and look at their platform to figure out where they stand. Well, they will be on. So even if you go, in August and you don't have a choice to pick our nominees, you will get to have a vote in those nonpartisan races.
You do. Correct? So the nonpartisan city, mayor, all that good stuff happens next year because it happens in the odd year.
2019.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. They're in the off year.
Exactly. But if you're looking at a nonpartisan
school board
race, right. And that is just somebody needs to win by the majority. Somebody needs to get over that. If they don't, it goes the top 2 vote getters go on to have their own election.
So it acts like a primary, even though it's nonpartisan, because it narrows it down. So we might have 15 people who are running for school board.
Right.
And instead of, just picking that one winner, if any of those one candidates don't reach 50% or over to be a clear winner, then they take the top two, right? The top two winners who get the highest percentage, and they go on to the November election, where also anybody who won their primary then goes on to that ballot. So really, when we talk about midterms, there are two important elections that happen within a few months of each other that you have to stay engaged with. The first one kind of narrows down the candidates, and then in November we go on to really choose the winner. Would you say that's an accurate way how the midterm elections work?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in that meantime, if you're looking at it and you think, oh my gosh, there's people running for judge and I have no idea.
Judges are so hard.
The voting, their records. I have no idea who these people are. If you're looking at races like that and you kind of don't know which way to go, League of Women Voters, there are organizations where you can go online, and they do provide a lot of information. And then also, if you see your neighborhood canvasser out walking with a clipboard, stop them and say, hey, I'm wondering, and they will give you their feedback too.
And so that brings me, which I wasn't planning on talking about, which is good. We had talked about our revolution's ability to endorse. So a lot of groups that have the power to endorse, they're kind of doing that work for you. And they kind of screen their candidates to whatever, motivates them to collectively, be an organization. So a lot of times, like you said, if you don't have the time or the due diligence to research all of these people, you can look to an organization that has the power to endorse and see who they suggest. Because if you trust them and they align with your values, whether it's our revolution or the women's group or a specific caucus that's advocating for disability rights or any other group that you feel like stands for your values, it's always good to check what their endorsements are because they could help you. It could be your union.
It can be your union.
Absolutely, that's a great point. So that's some way to do some due diligence regarding some of those more challenging races. What I also like to point out, and what I find people overlook a lot of the time, is you don't have to vote in anything that you don't feel comfortable with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had somebody walk out of a voting booth one time, and I was a poll watcher. So you can actually sign up at the supervisor of elections office, and they'll give you a training, and you get to stand on election day and pass out stickers to people.
As long as you're not running.
As long as you're not running. Exactly. And just make sure to be the eyes and make sure everything goes smoothly. But in one of those days, somebody came out and she said, I really had a moment where I felt like I was taking a Scantron until I realized I don't have to fill this in. And it made me laugh because I think there's something funny about the human nature that they get a piece of paper and like it's hard to leave something blank, but it's true. And especially, I don't think anyone would, don't advocate for an ignorant choice. If you don't know, it's fine to leave that be.
And I think that's important because a lot of people don't know that and they might shy away because they look at a ballot and they have no idea what to do. Even if there's just one candidate that you feel passionate about, and you don't want to, make an uninformed opinion, please get out there and vote for the candidate you feel passionately about.
Absolutely. One thing I'll say too, really quickly, because you mentioned the endorsements, and I've started to pull back and let new leadership come into our revolution. I started working with a congressional candidate. So I wanted to make sure my time and my interests were made clear. So I pulled a little bit from that. One of the things, though, that drew us to wanting to form under our revolution was that the endorsement process was bottom up. And so they lean on what the people on the ground say about the candidate. So if you go to their website, if you go to Our Revolution and they have a listing of endorsed candidates, it is not because someone who's been involved for 40 years sat in a meeting in DC and decided that this guy was the guy. It was because somebody on the ground in that district where this person is running met with them, interviewed them, understood that they could win, that they aligned with the values, passed that name up the chain. And so that's a beautiful thing. And it isn't true in all organizations. But that's a beautiful thing because then you do know that they're getting the endorsement from the people that are their neighbors all the way up.
Yeah, and like with our caucus, we have a very strict questionnaire that is unified per candidate that they have to answer based on the issues. And it not only is scrutinized by our local chapters, but then our state chapters. And we have a lot of input on whether or not we're allowed to do that endorsement. So that's a valid point, is how the endorsement process is laid out, and making sure that it's collaborative and reflective of what voters want and not just one person. And that's kind of what I feel like we're advocating for in politics. And when I say we, I mean progressives, because that word, which we'll talk a lot about in this podcast, means a lot of different things to people. But I think in general, one thing most progressives can get behind is making the process more inclusive, making it more reflective of what voters want, breaking down the power structure, focusing on grassroots, what you're talking about, bottom up and not top heavy. So I'm glad that we kind of always revisit that point when we're talking about all phases of this election.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So we have the primary on August 28th, the general election on November 6th. Just some stuff that I pulled off the supervisors of elections, because we want to talk about, if you do want to change your party and you want to be included in this, can you do it the same day? Can I decide on August 28th that there's a candidate I like and now I want to change myself from an NPA to a Democrat and go participate in that? Or are there dates that I have to be mindful of?
So no, you naughty person. You cannot. And we can probably bridge talking about what the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, what they're looking at in terms of their rules and their bylaws and rules committee will be looking at it, and then their general membership, because we do, as progressives, hope that there are some changes coming.
Absolutely.
Right now, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think you have until 11:59 at night, 29 days before the election.
It is. It's 29 days, exactly.
And the thing that gets me, why that should be really kind of etched in stone, because I was at a meeting the other day, and we were talking about this, and they were talking about the fact that the voter restoring the rights of felons, that they had received enough petitions, and this was going to be something that was going to be able to be on the ballot. And it is definitely a celebratory moment, because a lot of hours went into getting those petitions.
Sure did.
But of course, because I happen to have that fatalistic mindset sometimes, my next thought was, but we have to register all those people. So, it's great that you had it restored, and now we need to make sure that we actually get you registered and get you voting. And so the work is not done. So that comes into play.
The work is never done. So based on the 29 days before the election, the dates that I have here is if you want to immerse yourself in the primary or be included in the primary election, you would have to register as one party or the other by July 30th, 2018. And for the general election that goes afterwards, after we've chosen our nominees, by October 9th, you'd have to register just to be a voter, because those are nonpartisan races. So the one that you'd want to register for by October is if you're just a new voter and you haven't registered to vote before. Whereas the one on July 30th is if you want to, register for the first time as well, but also if you want to change your partisanship to participate in these primaries.
And now, if you are listening to this podcast and you've said, Jessica, you have convinced me to get involved, and I'm getting off the couch right now, and I'm going to put this down, and I'm going to get registered to vote. You actually don't even have to get off the couch. No. You can do this online now. You can register online.
Now, is that just in Hillsborough County, right? Or is that statewide?
It is statewide.
It's statewide.
And I wrote down the website because I was going to tell you what the website was, and now I can't find it. I think it's Register to Vote Florida. But I'm going to double check myself.
And I know that I've had a lot of friends who might be Green Party members or independents, who were really inspired by Bernie Sanders in this last election and thought that they'd be able to vote for him, and realized that they weren't going to be able to, and then had the full intent to change their party so that they could vote for him. And then through working long hours or, taking care of their children, were never actually able to make it down to the supervisor of elections. So the fact that you can do it at home while you're cooking dinner with a click of a button is a huge step forward in being more inclusive in our elections, I would say.
Absolutely. So yes, it is registertovoteflorida.gov.
Awesome.
So you can go on there. All you're going to need is either your driver's license number. If you have a state ID card, you'll need that number, the last 4 digits of your social security card, and you are good to go. Oh. So the only thing that would be better, there are some states that you're automatically registered to vote. You have to unregister if you choose not to.
Yes.
So I think that would be the only thing that would be easier than this. Because honestly, you could do this in your pajamas. You can hand it to your 18-year-old that's living in your home and say, do you like the dinner I cook you? Register to vote.
So it's so easy. No one has any excuse not to participate is what I'm taking away from this.
I can be subtle.
All right. So we're talking about midterms. We're talking about primaries. We've thrown around the terms closed and open primaries. And there's actually, from research I've done, and ones we haven't talked about, there's semi-open primaries or semi-closed primaries, and then you've mentioned jungle primaries. So in going forward, if we want to really reevaluate how inclusive we're being and how many people we're encouraging to participate in our democracy, what are the advantages or disadvantages? Let's talk about the primary. So, from what I read, and let me see if I can find this information. Sorry, you're going to hear some paper rustling with this, even though we tried not to. So 14 states actually have closed primaries, from what I read. 23 states have open primaries, and 13 states have semi-open primaries. So starting with the closed primaries, we've touched on that. That essentially means that you can only participate in choosing the nominee if you've registered with one of the two parties.
Right.
In open primaries, it doesn't matter what you're registered. You can go and vote for any of the candidates, but only in one for one. Like if there's a Republican candidate running and a Democratic candidate running, you can only help choose the nominee in one of those. You have to decide. You can't go and vote for the Republican nominee and then the Democratic nominee. You have to make that choice of who you want to help nominate.
Exactly. Exactly right.
And then in the semi-closed or semi-open, from what I understand, there's a definite Democratic nominee process and a Republican. And if you're an NPA, you can participate in either one. And again, you have to choose one. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
It gets a little confusing.
A little.
Right? It gets a little confusing when there are some that... I'm trying to explain this right because it confused the heck out of me when I first read it. There are some primaries where it is considered a semi-closed because you will, if you are registered as a Republican or a Democrat, you will only get that ballot.
Right.
However, if you're an independent, it is open to you.
Yes.
However,
Right.
you have to declare what ballot you want
Yes.
when you get to the table before you go into
Correct.
your booth. The other is you don't have to declare if you're an independent. So that's the...
More like a semi-open.
It's still a semi, exactly. But you don't have to tell the lady sitting at the booth which you're going to do. You can go in and I don't know if they have an electronic. I've never voted in that system before. But when I was reading, I had never heard the term a jungle primary before, but being from California, I knew just it hasn't been that long ago that they passed a proposition out there that this was how they would do it. So they were joining the state of Washington. Louisiana has been doing it for a really long time. And it's the top two. It's the top two. It's wide open. And it's funny if you think about it, because I think most people look at those areas, maybe not Louisiana, but they look at those areas and they think, oh, okay, well, if you consider yourself super progressive, whatever that means for you, the Democrat might not be far left enough. You might want that Green Party. You might have two really great Green Party candidates, right? So for them, it is, oh, I want to know how far I can go ideologically, right? So if you think in terms of if they said in 2018, Florida was going to do it that way,
a jungle primary,
I don't know that Democrats would be too excited, right? Like
no,
they might
wouldn't
think,
be.
wow,
I can tell you right now, they wouldn't be that excited.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe baby steps, like you said, we're improving. We're improving.
So a jungle primary means it's almost like a runoff, essentially, then.
Exactly.
Meaning it doesn't matter what partisan, just the two people that receive the most votes in general then advance to the election, so you're narrowing it down. So it's essentially just a runoff for partisan candidates.
Right. And it has I think they also call it a blanket primary.
Oh,
I think there's another name for it.
Okay.
Too. Another opportunity to Google.
So I'm going to use some kind of real world context here when we're talking about primaries. And you and I had discussed this a little bit, and I've kind of shared this opinion. But one of the issues I have with closed primaries, aside from it just being undemocratic and excluding voters because they refuse to identify with only one of two parties. But how I feel it actually cripples the party is because most of the people who participate in a primary are people who are party loyalist or involved in the parties or have the time and luxury or the passion of being educated on the candidates who are running, and they really decide our nominee. And then from there, we expect that nominee to be universally, appealing to nonpartisan, to some Republicans that we're hoping to get on our side, because there's always that, moderate Republicans that we need. And so we're making a small subset of the population who have different values because they work inside the party and they understand, or they might be, more passionate about different issues, or they might understand a candidate's background that won't appeal to other candidates. Like, for example, right now in our gubernatorial race, we have a lot of candidates, but two of the ones that I personally have heard the most talk about, and that's not to say the other ones aren't having a buzz, but the ones that I've heard the most discussion about would be Gwen Graham, who's more of maybe, let's say, a moderate choice, and Andrew Gillum, who is the mayor of Tallahassee, who's more of the, progressive candidate. And a lot of party insiders might find value in Gwen Graham being the daughter of Bob Graham, and her track record and her, her connection in that family. Whereas, that might be important to party insiders. They might see the value in that. But when you then take that and you give that to, a lot of other voters who don't see value in that, that's almost kind of crippling us, I feel like, to only allow people with a certain experience kind of choose our nominee. What's your thoughts on that?
I think so minutes after you asked if I would come and we would have this conversation, which if I can come and have a conversation with you, I just heard a comedian say that the circumstances don't matter. It's the company. The company is at the root of everything. So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, what does it mean to discuss primaries? Are we going to discuss emotions behind them? Are we going to discuss? And so I was thinking in broad terms, and I think it relates to all aspects, really, is to have an understanding of the motivation of the person that's talking to you. Okay. So if someone is talking to you because they support a candidate, right, or they work for a candidate, yes, they have one motivation. They have one goal, right? They want to get their candidate elected. And just like I don't fault a corporation for wanting to make money, I don't fault somebody for trying to promote their one candidate. Right. And in that instance, it might make it a little bit easy to swallow if someone with Graham's voting history says, I'm absolutely a progressive. Right. Right? So somebody might think, well, I don't know about that, but that person is trying to get you pulled to her side. So they have a definite motivation. Right. When it comes to all primaries, if your motivation is whether this person is electable, that is very different than whether this person is ideological. Right. So it depends when you're talking to somebody why you want to get them engaged and what is motivating them to get engaged. So when you look at all the people who are very passionately progressive and want to get things moving, right, the vast majority of those people are looking at it from an ideological standpoint. They want the purest candidate in which they can align. And in any respect, I should just say, whatever the motivation is for someone, right, it will never serve your purpose well to try to convince them that they're wrong. Right. It just doesn't. Whatever the motivation is for them, as long as you have an understanding of what that is, and we're all moving in the same direction, it's time wasted to try to convince somebody who only wants that ideologically pure person, right, that they're incorrect, right? So other people will say, yeah, it kind of matters to me. And here's a perfect example. So our revolution endorsed a candidate in Omaha, Nebraska. He was the best candidate for that race at that time. Right. Progressives had a very hard time because he was openly pro-life. He openly said, that's a hard in my personal life, right, I am a pro-life person. And a lot of ideologically pure people said, wait a minute, how can we get behind this guy? But there is a big part of that endorsement process that says you also have to be able to win the race. You also have to be able to match where you are and win that race. And so that's sometimes the progress in baby steps that people don't always like to know that they get behind, and they don't always like to know that has to happen. But it honestly does, because otherwise you look back and you think, we never would have taken major leaps from 100 years ago to where we are now if we didn't have the baby steps to get us here, right?
So what I worry about when we look at it in that direction, right, and what I feel like we're talking about is on either side's kind of this purist idea of, or on one side a purist idea, and on the other side this very focused electability idea, right? And kind of within the Democratic Party and maybe within the Republican Party, that's kind of the divide right now, right? We have, like you're talking about, progressives who really want to change the system, and they want to start holding candidates to a higher quality, and they don't want to compromise on that because that's kind of how we get watered down, politics in the first place. And at the same time, you have a lot of moderate Democrats who have been in this for a long time, and they've seen what has been successful, and they're looking at electability and how much a person can raise and the logistics of things. And sometimes that's a hard medium to find the balance between those two things.
Right.
But what I worry about is that our political landscape has changed so much with this last election that it did indeed kind of throw this bombshell into all of the norms and everything that has been successful in the past, and all the things that we thought would indicate a pure win is gone now. And that the voters in general are so frustrated and angry and divided that they don't trust either parties, and they don't trust any candidates. And what they're looking for is somebody who's going to come and tell it like it is, whether it's telling it like it is or good or bad. I mean, I hate to use the word because it has such a negative connotation, but they're really looking for a populist leader. And that could be a positive populist leader who's really talking to our systematic problems and fixing our country, or it could be a populist leader who's filling us full of propaganda and dividing us with, ways that we're different and playing the race card. So my fear is that what used to be a sure success for electability in so many previous races is not the answer now. And that as Democrats and maybe as Republicans, we've disconnected to what the voters want so much that when we're looking at how much money can a candidate raise, it's not even how much money can they raise, but do they use it effectively, because you can waste $80,000 on a mailing campaign that people are going to throw in the garbage, and robocalls that people hang up on the second they get it. Or, you can have people canvassing to door making that connection, and people phone banking for you that are a live voice that are telling you why things are important. So I worry that, especially with closed primaries, the people on the inside of any party are so disconnected from the actual voters that we're setting ourselves up for failure. And that's what I worry about.
Right. And you really you touched upon the big, huge X in the equation, right? The variable that nobody knows. And that is actually, what are people thinking when they go in and vote? Right. What did our messaging work? Right. And sometimes, so the reality is that you have a lot of people that get paid a lot of money to try to determine what is important to people and what words catch their attention and all of that good stuff, all the messaging that goes around it. Right. So their livelihood depends on parties buying their services so that they can tell the parties, this is how you need to talk to people because this is what's important. And that variable that you hit on is, we all looked around and said, where did all of these people come from that didn't listen to any of that and just decided whether it was Bernie or Trump? They were worried about their job and they were worried about their paycheck and they were worried about, and that wasn't a touchstone that anybody was managing to get a hold of in, in the bigger scheme, in the bigger party politics. So in a perfect world, we would have the Democratic Party, even at the Hillsborough County level, we would have them doing a lot of listening and not as much talking, right? Not that they talk too much. I haven't been to a meeting. I'm not making that judgment. But you would be doing a lot of listening and you would be understanding what it is that is important to people. And you would take that into consideration when you decide who you want to give your support to. Yeah. Right. And so, and this is always a funny thing that I would say, because people tell me all the time, I have a position within the party. I can't get behind a certain candidate. Right. And I would kind of laugh and think, okay, well, I was a court reporter for many years, and, everyone deserves a defense, and they get a free defense. Do they get equally good defense? No, not really. So, yeah, do you have to support somebody that is within your party? Sure. Yes, you absolutely do. Do you give them vocal, loud? That's up to you. That's up to you as a person. And if you did a lot of listening and you knew what was important to people, and you could build the bench of candidates that were educated and understood and in touch, then this wouldn't be the issue. Right. But you're talking to people who registered independent for a purpose. Right. They see that whoever has been in office, we've had growing income inequality. We haven't been able to figure this out. We've known about the climate change issue for a very long time. We're very close to them be unanimously saying we're at the point of no return. There are pressing things that have been going on for a long time. So they decide to register as an independent, and they're looking at Democrats telling them, if you want to change, you need to get behind and trust us. We've put the best people in these positions. And so they really don't have a reason to trust you, and you're not inviting them to come into the process. Yeah. So in that perfect world, the party at the county level and above would understand, open up the primary, be a lot more concerned about running the absolute best candidate that you can. Exactly. And if you do that, and you believe that your message is better than the other side, which I do, and you speak to values, who are you as a person? What do you believe as a person? Right. You make that connection, you're going to be just fine. However, you're asking people, and I say this, my daughter is sitting in the room with us today, and I make this comment to her all the time. Sweetie, there is no new power in the world. There is no power that just becomes out of nowhere. If you're taking power, if women are taking power, or the LGBT caucus is taking power, you're taking it from someone. Someone is feeling their power going away just a little bit more. So that being the case, opening up those primaries, guess what?
Decentralizes the power.
You're not getting new power. Exactly. And so people will be feeling as though a little bit of their power is going away.
And that's a great point, because one of my taglines that I always say in trying to help the Democratic Party evolve is, and it comes down to loyalty oaths, that when you're actually a member of the county party, you have to sign a loyalty oath saying that you won't advocate for a non-Democrat in a race where a Democrat is running.
That sounds so democratic, doesn't it? Welcome to the Democratic Party. And could you please sign on this loyalty oath?
And they're trying to add more oaths. But is that we should inspire loyalty and not demand it. And I think that's what you're talking about by running the right candidate. We should trust the voters and tap into what they want. And what you're talking about as far as the party being more reflective and better listeners, there's a model for that built into the party. I mean, as precinct committee people, and we talked about that in the last podcast, it's the very basic building of what you can, when you join the party, you become a precinct committee person, and you're in charge of. And what I find the disconnect is connecting with the voters in your precinct, but also taking that information from the voters back to the party so that they can give it to the candidates, right? You're supposed to be giving them information, your fellow precinct people, but you're also supposed to be extracting that information. So you should be having conversations with your neighbors and finding about what issues matter to them and what holds them back in the Democratic or what the party and what they don't like. And then there should be times where you bring that to the party, and the party says to the candidates, here's the feedback that we're getting for Tampa Palms or East Tampa. These are the issues that matter for them. And there really is a breakdown in that model, whereas most of the precinct committee people that I know think that their goal is to get out the information. Here are the candidates. Right. Here who's running. And there's not that aspect of, like you said, listening, gather that information and bringing it back up to the chain so that we can really be reflective of what voters want. That piece is definitely struggling and missing. And it's a detriment to us. And I feel like that's sort of the problem, whether it's closed primaries or loyalty oaths or this inefficiency in the model that we've laid pointed out is that reflective quality of really caring about what motivates voters and what their hardships are and why they're struggling or what they want or the change that they're seeking.
Absolutely.
So I think it's all kind of connected when we're reevaluating as a party, again, how we want to be more inclusive and include voters. And we don't have anybody reaching out to NPAs.
And really, I will say, not just with the congressional race that I'm working on right now, but let's use it as an example.
Sure.
There's just shy of 500,000 voters within that congressional district.
That's a lot
right?
of voters.
So if you're there's no way I'm going to be able to, I could have an army of people. We're not going to knock on every door. If you, and I know you mentioned that you had talked about precinct committee people before. So I wanted the most valuable thing that could ever come from a county party is when they reach out to me and they say, hey, have you talked to Jessica Vaughn? Because she has her precinct down.
Right.
She can tell you where you can walk and can't walk, the neighborhood festivals that are going on, the ones that are that connection breaks down that 450,000 voters because now you have that local connection.
Yes.
And it's a lot easier for me to reach out to Jessica and say, hey, Jessica, tell me about your precinct. And so that is vital. All that the money and all of that other stuff is good. I promise you, it does not guarantee you a win. What does though is that personal interaction with people. And that's valuable. It really is.
And who's reaching out to MPAs in that case? Where are they getting that personal interaction?
Exactly.
I mean, they're not, right? I mean, when you're working in a partisan race, you're targeting other voters that are registered that. I can't tell you how many times on a call campaign or phone banking that they exclude NPAs. And so unfortunately, again, by making yourself an NPA, you're almost closing yourself off from this world of people reaching out to you to educate you, to include you. It's again a catch-22. You're closing yourself off and they're pushing you away. And it almost feels like it's tying the hands of anyone who's not a partisan, registered in a partisan. So,
and when you're looking at a lot of the rural areas, especially, NPAs are going to make a difference for you.
Absolutely.
And when you get into gerrymandering and all of this good stuff that happens, and both sides do it, but when you get into all of that good stuff, that's when you might not need to have a conversation about how you're going to get a Trump voter over to your side, but you are having a conversation about that independent and why is he independent. And so it's a good idea. If you have plenty of time and a lot of volunteers, go knock on the door of some independent people and say, why are you?
Yeah.
Do a little ID and identify what their issues were and why they decided to register the way they would, because I think the answers would surprise a lot of people. Well, I know sometimes I get surprised, and I've been doing this a long time.
In general, I find that issues aren't as important in campaigns. Like as a candidate, when I've gone to candidate trainings, every single one of them, with the exception of DFA, has been open your Rolodex, which who has a Rolodex anymore? Find all of your friends, put a money number next to their name. Ask for 3 times that much until they give it to you.
That's such a personal way of going about it. So your Aunt Clara, how much do you think Aunt Clara can give you?
It's all fundraising. There's never crafting a platform, being reflective, talking about the issues, reaching out. That's such a vital part that I feel like has been lost in all of our campaigning. So we're kind of getting off track here, but that's fine. I like when we get off track. What I wanted to kind of talk about, so what do you see, whether it's statewide or whether it's locally, that are going to be some hot ticket issues that we should look for in the midterms that are coming up?
Gosh, I think nationally, I think 2 things, actually. I think it's going to be about Trump, and I don't think it should be about Trump, which sounds like I'm probably a lot more confused than I actually am. But I think that a lot of people are taking the opportunity to say, I'm getting involved because damn, right?
Right.
Or we have to do something and change that. I might have kind of supported him, or I might have stepped aside for a while or whatever. Right. So there might be an aspect of that nationally. I don't think that is how you win.
Right.
Right. So the whole thing about running for office is you need to fire the other person, but then you also need to let them know why they should hire you.
Right.
And so I think, He's done a good, and nationally, there's a good enough reason to fire.
Right.
So we need to focus a lot more on why we need to get hired.
Right.
And reestablish what it means to be a Democrat, what it means, what do we stand for, and all of that, so that people are very, very, very clear. And the first thing that people will say, you can take an economic issue and say, well, you know, Democrats, we are for raising the minimum wage.
Right.
You know, we champion working families. And then the first comeback will be, how much money do you take from Wall Street? Right? So we haven't done a really good job of making sure that they understand what the value system is.
Absolutely.
So I think nationally, that's more where the focus will be. But I think locally, transportation is going to be everything. So again, I live out in eastern Hillsborough County.
Right.
And it takes a good long time to get just about anywhere. However, it is not as bad for me as it is for some people that live within the city of Tampa,
Sure.
which surprises me,
Right.
because you would think that would give you some kind of an advantage. And my kids are older, and you travel and you go to cities, and when they were younger, it was, holy smokes, you mean these people don't have to have cars?
Right.
They can just ride trains and
dream.
buses. And it doesn't seem like that should sound like the Jetsons. But when you lived here, it did look like the Jetsons.
Yeah.
To them, it was like a flying car. And so now that they're looking at colleges and they're looking at where they might want to establish their life,
Right.
it is increasingly a topic. I don't want to own a car. I don't want to have a car and a payment and insurance. I would much rather live in a city where, you know, public transportation is available
Right.
and smooth and all of that. So I think locally, that is something that across the board, everybody agrees on. And even if you don't, even if you have your dually pickup truck and you don't want to let go of it, I get you. I do.
But you still don't want to sit in traffic for an hour.
You
if you
don't want to
need
sit in traffic. And
that-
you completely understand that the people that want to ride their bikes
Right.
shouldn't be taking their life into their own hands
we
every
have
time
the
they go
worst
out.
pedestrian homicide rates, I think, in the entire country.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
really scary. It's exciting to hear about Bayshore possibly closing for, you know, one day a week and opening that up to foot traffic. That's one road,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
One day a week. So I think that overwhelmingly, because it touches on so many things. It touches on the economy. It touches on people's overall happiness.
Right.
How, you know, how excited they are to live here. And little things like that. They do little studies where they say when people are actually happy about where they live,
Right.
they don't litter. Right? They keep things cleaner. They want sidewalks all of a sudden. Your improvement of your life starts changing. But when you're grumpy and mad.
Are you trying to say if we like focus on infrastructure and,
It is
and
a crazy,
building and things that will
crazy
equally
thought.
support our community, that everyone benefits holistically?
I know. It is nutty, granola eating chit chat. But that is, and it does make that, it makes that trickle down, and people
Right.
start seeing, I don't see it a lot in Florida, but I know they do it. I see it a lot in other states when you'll be driving by and they're working on a bridge or road, and they'll actually have a sign and it'll say your tax dollars at work, and it'll tell you, you know, this raise in, you know, percentage of sales tax went to this bridge. There's something to be said for that. People need to be able to see what it is that they're paying for.
Right.
You're paying dues to be a part of this country club, and you need to see what the value is.
I love that analogy. So kind of my takeaway from this conversation that I've gotten is, one, local elections matter, and the local, as far as your county, your state, your community, they matter more, honestly, in some of these midterm elections and choosing who's going to sit on your school board and who's going to sit in your city council, way more than the national level. So that's one thing that I take away from this. Two, in general, it sounds like if you want to be in our state, part of choosing who our nominees are going to be, unfortunately, you're going to have to register in one of the parties or other. Because when we say partisanship, we mean being identified as a Democrat or a Republican.
Right.
And for people who want to do that and they don't want to commit to it, luckily we have a system where you can go on the next day after you've voted and change back to an NPA, but at least you have a say in choosing the nominee. That in general, the Democratic Party needs to do a better job of being reflective and engaging people and changing our message. And that we really should reevaluate closed primaries in the state and whether or not they're inclusive and they engage all of our voters. So I did want to give you an opportunity because you came on, and I don't want to push one candidate over the other, but we are trying to keep people engaged to what's happening locally. And since you are working, with someone who's running for office, if you could very quickly, just kind of introduce your candidate and tell us a little bit about, why you're supporting him or anything that you'd want to let our voters know. And then we'll kind of wrap up the show.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never had to give a stump speech before based on my candidate. I'm used to being the one listening to it and saying, no, change this and do that differently. So, Andrew Learned is running for Congress. The incumbent right now, the person currently sitting in that seat is Dennis Ross.
So he's running on the federal level.
He is. So he's running to unseat Dennis Ross,
who's a Republican currently.
Who is a Republican currently.
So he's the Democratic, one of the Democratic candidates.
Exactly.
And where does that district encompass? What are kind of the boundaries and the areas in that district?
Mm-hmm. So that is District 15. Mm-hmm. So we pick up Temple Terrace. We go down basically along 75. We pick up Brandon, Valrico, touch slightly south of there.
Okay.
We basically then head east, Plant City, Lakeland. We don't go as far. So southern border, we cut just under Lakeland. So we don't pick up this Winter Haven, we don't pick up the southern part.
Okay.
We used to pick up Poinciana, but then it was redistricted. So now we head north, just after Lakeland, and we pick up Claremont in Lake County. So it's 3 counties.
Okay.
It's Lake County, Polk County, and Hillsborough County. We are in a primary, so we will go and make sure everybody votes for Andrew. That's our goal, making sure that happens on August 28th, and then we'll go from there to the general. It's really simply stated. It really is. I could go in, people could look up Dennis Ross themselves. They can see pictures of
How long has he been in the current seat, Dennis
He went
Ross?
in 2010.
2010. So he's been there 8 years.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay.
And so, I'm 7 years.
Was there a Democrat or Republican in that seat before him? Do you know?
A Republican. It was Adam Putnam before him.
Okay.
So that was the race that I worked in 08 and 10.
Okay.
Because even at that point, you kind of knew Adam Putnam was headed for bigger things, right? Eventually the governorship was on his radar. So we kind of wanted to stop that process. But then it was redistricted in 12 and it shifted those boundaries a little bit.
It was just redistricted again because I was in 15 as of 2016 and now I'm in 14.
Yeah. So numbers shift around a little bit. So the exciting thing is the first thing when you would go to talk to people about this race, the first thing they would tell you is, holy smokes, that's a very Republican area.
Right.
And they would tell you that the way that it was districted, there's a rating system, but it basically means R plus 6.
Wow.
So the Republicans have a 6-point advantage, right, on the win of that. However, the special elections that we've seen, we Democrats are winning elections in R plus 7s.
Interesting.
And R plus 5s and R plus 11s. It's getting
plus 11.
It's getting extremely competitive now. So that there's a whole new way of looking at things. And thank you, independents, right? And thank you for good people getting up there. Exactly. So you can look up all the good stuff about Dennis Ross. What you need to know about Andrew is he's a veteran. He's a small business owner in Valrico. He's young. He has young, creative ideas on how to get things fixed and how to find solutions with people. And he will repeatedly tell you that the 3 things that bring him to wanting to run and represent is we need to feed the hungry, we need to care for the sick, and we need to treat people fairly.
Wow.
And it seems like a really low bar. It seems like we should probably be trying to advance more than that.
Right.
Unfortunately, the bar has gotten that low.
Sure.
So Polk County is number 2 in the nation for food insecurity. So children are going to bed tonight, tomorrow night. They're hungry. They're not going to do well in school.
Yeah.
We've heard 0 from our congressman about this. So yes, the bar is really that low. So andrewlearned.com, you can go to the website, find out more about him. He's all over social media.
He is.
So his tweets are entertaining. I will give him that. So you can find him there too. We have fundraisers coming up all over Facebook. You'll be able to get information. We've been walking door to door somewhere within District 15 since August.
Yeah.
So we've had some really dedicated people coming out, probably enjoying the cooler weather right now, but coming out talking to people
Right.
and letting them know that that there's an opportunity to change things. There's an opportunity to actually have a representative. So Dennis Ross, this is the trivia. Dennis Ross has done one major piece of legislation the entire time that he's been 7 years. He's effectively been there. He's done one. Do we know what this is? Have you heard
no
Andrew say
idea.
this? He named a post office. That is his claim to fame, and some people could argue. I don't think it's enough. I don't think it's enough to get the job again.
Right.
I don't. I think you should probably get replaced. So
if people want to look at his voting record, let's say, right? Because sometimes that's important. Just because somebody has an R or a D next to their name doesn't mean that they're voting in the way that you'd expect them to because they represent your party. Where are some websites that people can go to check the voting records of some of these people that might be primaried or that might have people running against them? Do you have any good suggestions on that?
You can't. It gets a little confusing. The good news, I would say, though, because it gets confusing between I don't want to confuse it between Florida and Washington because I think that it's important locally,
right?
To know how people have voted for you as well.
Yeah.
And what they've worked on the county level and what have they sat on committee wide and what has been their purpose. But what I will say is that as an incumbent, Dennis Ross, if you Google him, you can go to his own homepage and you can see every vote that he's taken, bills that he has sponsored and didn't get anywhere,
right.
What he has decided to co-sponsor. All of that is public information. So you absolutely can go and look and see what they will tell you one thing. And Republicans, they will tell you one thing. What they do is entirely a different story.
Right.
So
and Democrats.
Well, I didn't want to throw that out there. I was going to let you do that.
I'm not afraid to say that as a loyal Democrat. I'll probably get in big trouble for that later. Okay, so one of the websites I find, and I want to get your feedback on this, is ballotpedia.org.
Oh, Ballotpedia. Ballotpedia has district information too.
And it has great information. It's where I pulled so much of this primary information, state specific, stuff on candidates. If you're trying to do your research, I found that to be a great resource.
It's kind of easy to remember because it sounds like Wikipedia,
right?
And ballot. It's pretty easy to remember. Yeah.
So, are there any other resources that you want to suggest for people in general when it comes to getting involved more politically or mining information that you might have off the top of your head? So I will tell you that I am probably really nerdy that I prefer opening a book to a site but this brings me to a really interesting thing. So there's a thing called the Cook's Political Report and it's a really big fat book and it has all of the electeds on there and a little bio about them and it tells you what they're voting. And that's where you get the R+6. That's actually a Cook's rating where they get these for different districts, right? But it's thick. It looks like a big dictionary. So when it's about to come out, I get it on pre-order. I get super excited. Cook's is going to come out because then this is how nerdy you can get. If you have been working in an area for a good long time to organize people, you might move that rating. Like it might now be an R+, so you might have impacted or you might now have a D10. So, it's just funny that there have been times when I showed up to pick up my book at Barnes & Noble and there were multiple cooks waiting to get picked up and I kind of wanted to stay to see who else those people were because I could make a new best friend. You don't know. I don't know who's picking those other books up, but they're awesome people. I love that in general because there is so much like utilizing the internet and so many websites thrown out and there are so many voters that aren't necessarily internet savvy or don't want to go to a website. We do, as technology increases, start to forget about people who don't utilize that new technology. So the fact that you threw in a book that's not a website that you can go to, that people who, love books can go to, I love that that's an alternative of finding out information. So thank you for touching on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can also go to party websites.
Right.
You can also say that part too,
Okay. So there was one other thing I wanted to talk about, that someone had asked me to mention when we were talking about the whole primary process is if you want to be a candidate and not just a voter, there's a qualifying period where you have up until that date to put in your application with the supervisor of elections or your candidate form, and file. And usually there's a fee associated with it depending on what race you are. Do you know what the qualifying date is by any chance?
I'm really familiar with when mine is. So I'll give you mine being the congressional race.
Right.
So if you're running for Congress, you will either have to collect petitions,
right,
signatures from registered voters of any party within that district. There's an asterisk because much like English, there's always an asterisk unless it's a redistricting year. Then,
I didn't know
the
that.
signature can be from wherever.
Wow. Huh.
So you have to have a certain percentage of signatures, right?
In order to get on the ballot and
qualified
for them to say, we're going to let you be a candidate.
Exactly. So, or you pay a fee.
Right.
So they take the number of voters, means we have to have 4,737 petition signatures.
Wow.
They have to get,
sometimes they throw those out because they're not valid. So you always have to overshoot. Yes.
So you have to overcompensate for that. 10 cents per signature to get verified by the Division of Elections. Plus the cost of printing. So it isn't as though that's a free, plus volunteer time. Right. So it isn't as though that's a free option. Or you pay a fee, which in our case is $10,440. So that varies. When you look at local races and people that are running to, say, represent you in Tallahassee or Board of County Commissioners, they can also do the petitions. Yes. Or the fee is lower because it's, I want to say it's
a percentage of the salary. Yeah.
Right. And it's 6% of the salary, I think, if you have a party affiliation. If you don't, I think it's 4%. I think they give you a little bit of a break. So you either pay the fee or you do the petitions. And this all happens on it's called qualifying week. Right. So it's the week in which that qualifying period is open. Yep. And historically or traditionally, I'm not sure how you want to look at it, that is where stuff gets really interesting. Right. Because that's where you're going to have, that's really where it kind of meets the road. Now is when you're going to know
who's going to be in that race.
Who is actually going to run. Because you might have somebody who, let's take Janet Cruz. So she's being termed out, right? She can't run again. Yes. But come qualifying week, she might look to see what other people do Monday and decide she might do something Wednesday. So
it's where people have the last opportunity to play musical chairs.
Exactly. And we see it all the time, especially with the Board of County Commissioners. Yes. We see a lot of people saying, oh, well, I'm only phased out of District 2, so now I'm going to run countywide.
Even now they're doing, it's already musical chairs.
Right. So that qualifying week is when.
So yours is
super
I think
exciting.
It's the same July. Is it generally? Isn't it 2 or 3 months before?
So we wrap up on noon, May 4th.
May 4th. Okay.
Right. I think it's June. I think it's about a month later for the local races. I actually might have it written down in my little notes somewhere.
Well, people can also go to the Supervisor of Elections, either statewide or in your county, to find all this qualifying information, to look at your candidates, to find out who's running. You can even look up their campaign donations and see who they're taking money from. So we'll actually have another podcast about how to find this information, but I did kind of want to touch on that because that's important in our primary process, to know the last day if you want to be a candidate, of when you can qualify and when you can participate in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I really want to thank you for coming all the way out to Tampa Palms from far away in order to contribute to this. If people want to get in touch with you, either because they're interested in our revolution or if they're interested in supporting your candidate or learning more, what's a good way to get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So people can give me a call. My number is 813-385-8605. That's my cell number. Awesome. So people can always give me a call there.
Can we text you there too?
That's actually better. You know, I finally just changed my voicemail message greeting to say,
text me.
Let's be honest. Just text me. We both know I'm not going to get it. Yeah. So texting is actually even better.
Is there a certain time frame? Can I do it at like 3:00 in the morning drunk, or?
I might not pick up.
Just kidding.
I laughed when I first started working on the campaign saying, okay, Wednesdays were going to be my night off. I would make a good meal and we'd all hang out and stuff. And then increasingly looking at the kids like, I know it's Wednesday, but I really got to do this. Right. So, but people can always give me a call. AndrewLearned.com. It's really easy to get in touch with us there. There's all kinds of contact us stuff. Okay. My email, rmoffett, Moffett, not ITT, ETT at AndrewLearned.com. So if they want to drop me an email, if you want to know more about our revolution, we actually have a meeting coming up February 10th, which is right around the corner.
That's next Saturday?
That is.
Awesome.
Yeah, we're just days away. So we'll be at the Peace House in Temple Terrace. Okay. I don't have the exact
address on
me right now. I apologize for that. But if they go into Facebook, our revolution, we have a group on there. And you can look, and we have, we post the meetings and all of that good stuff, but you can come and find out what we're doing. And our meetings, they're great because they're informational and it's therapeutic at times, but we're also doing stuff. And so while the meeting's going on, if you want to send a postcard to a legislator and let them know what you think about something, we have that available. We have some people that can't come to meetings and they might donate money just to buy stamps.
Right.
And so we're always doing something. There's always something happening. And that was probably, you go to so many meetings and it's an hour at least out of your evening and you came away with more information. But
absolutely,
I would like if they felt like they were a little more productive and they did something in that hour.
Absolutely.
So that's also nice too. So we'll be talking about who's coming on board to take over the leadership aspect of the local group.
Right.
And then more about the hub and how that's going to expand out and what that looks like, and all kinds of coordinating campaigns and make sure we're working smarter and not just harder. And
I love that.
Truly moving everybody in the same direction. Indivisibles, surlies, whatever brought you out.
Right.
We need to all make sure that we're not doubling efforts.
Yeah.
That we're progressing, right?
Yeah.
Whatever that is defined for you personally, progress.
Absolutely.
So yeah. So I look forward to seeing everybody out there.
I've always appreciated how collaborative you guys have been with us as the Progressive Caucus, with different candidates, how open we've been, how quickly and easily it was to establish a relationship, and, how proactive you guys have always been in, making sure those relationships are intact and having parties and hosting events, because I think a big portion of what is missed in a kind of our movement, our revolution, is building personal relationships aside from just working together on issues.
Absolutely.
And I think that's important when we have divisions or growing pains, so that we're not just attacking each other because our relationship is only surface based on, the same issues, that we're actually building relationships on our families and our friends and common interest, and we're spending time celebrating together and getting to know each other, because that's what gets us through those growing pains of when we're talking about issues or intersectionality or, different issues where we might not always see the exact same perspectives. So
absolutely.
I do appreciate that.
You're very, very welcome. I will tell you, when we were first doing stuff, our kids were really little, so they were canvassing with us, like pulling them in wagons. And if somebody might not agree with you, it's not as easy for them to walk up and tell you when you have your little kids.
Right.
And they, we celebrated, holidays together or
when
whatever.
When they see you as an actual person,
when they see that dimension,
being.
Conversation is easier. So you're doing a huge part to open this conversation and to keep it facilitated. So let me know in the future how I help.
Yes. Well, I hope you come back. I'd also love to have your husband, who is your strong partner and ally. And I love
he will want to tell you that our revolution literally means his revolution. That's what he'll be exciting.
I love his enthusiasm.
I do
both
too.
of you.
I do too.
So again, for all of our listeners, thank you so much. I've been your host, Jessica Vaughn. If you want to give us any feedback, first of all, please visit our Facebook group, Claiming My Mind. And we want to include more entertaining pieces and talk about some stuff I might include later. So please kind of stay with us through our growing pains and help shape our show. So again, thank you so much. And hopefully you'll tune into our next episode. Bye-bye.